The Gospels are internally anonymous. They don't say, "Hi, this is Matthew writing this Gospel." That is the main reason that some skeptics will posit that the Gospels were not written by the traditional authors, namely Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Bart Ehrman, the famous agnostic scholar, said of the Gospel authors, "They in fact are anonymous writers. They certainly were not the disciples of Jesus." This video will examine the question of authorship of the four Gospels. Were they written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or are they anonymous? Let's go back to Ehrman's claim and the problem that the Gospels are internally anonymous. First, this is an argument from silence, an informal logical fallacy, and Ehrman's claim that they certainly were not disciples of Jesus is simply indefensible. Secondly, while some ancient authors included their name in the text itself, there are many who did not. Professor of classics at the University of Warwick, Simon Swain, wrote, "It is perfectly normal for literary works to begin without a reference to their author. The author's name should already be known to the reader or hearer from the usual devices." Simon Gathercole from the University of Cambridge said, "It is a category mistake to say that a work is anonymous because it does not contain within it the name of the author." Also, if the books were actually anonymous, then we would expect to find much debate over the authorship and even find some out of the thousands of New Testament manuscripts that attribute them to different names. We find neither of these things. Let's now go through 5 key reasons to accept the traditional authorship. Number 1, all manuscripts that have a title page credit them to the traditional authors. Number 2, there is no gospel manuscript that shows a different author name. Number 3, the authors were unanimously accepted in the first century and onwards. They were unanimously accepted across the world, the Middle East, Africa, Asia Minor, and Europe. The hypothesis that the authors were anonymous has no mechanism to explain why the authors were unanimously accepted all over the world. Number 4, the author names would not have been invented. Matthew, writing to a Jewish audience, was a tax collector, a position hated by Jews. Mark was a follower of Peter, his main source. It would be far more persuasive to say the Gospel of Peter if they were making things up. Luke interviewed many eyewitnesses, but was himself not one of the 12 disciples. John was the only Gospel author within Christ's inner three, and he is well attested as the author of his Gospel. Support comes not only unanimously from the early church, but also Irenaeus, who personally knew Polycarp, the disciple of John, says John wrote the Gospel. Number 5, and surprisingly, the book of Hebrews proves that the early church unanimously accepted Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as the 4 Gospel authors. Why? Because Hebrews is the book that is actually anonymous, and there was much debate as to whether it was written by Paul, Luke, Barnabas, Apollos, or someone else. There was no debate among the church about authorship of the Gospels. There are many other internal and external evidences for traditional authorship of the Gospels. Your Bible says Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for good reason.